Welcome, everyone, to our inaugural launch of the Touchless Wellness Association's webinar. And today, together with my co-host, Nigel Franklyn, and one of our TWA partners, we are really delighted to have Freddie Moross, the founder and CEO of Myndstream, with us to take a ride on this inaugural webinar. Freddie, thank you so much for being with us. We're really delighted to have you. And before we get started, I want to remind our audience, for those of whom who didn't take part or haven't seen yet, the 10 minutes, 10 questions that you did with Erin Lee, the founder and CEO of the Touchless Wellness Association. And that was, I listened to that very carefully and I loved it because it was a really good 10 minutes, very well spent. So we're not going to revisit all of that because if you haven't, for all of those out there who haven't really listened and tuned in on that yet, we really invite you to do that because it'll really give you the ABCs of Myndstream. Yes. So Nigel and I chatted around, what is it that we really want to talk to you about? And we've aligned around two big areas. And I think it's Nigel and I really love doing deep dives. And so this is an opportunity to go down that road with you. Nigel, before we start, are any comments that you want to make before we get going?
No, I just yeah, thanks, Freddie. We've got the big guy himself for our very first webinar. So I appreciate you jumping into these uncharted waters of ours.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and extremely honored to be chosen to be the first. So
as you should.
All right, so let's get started. So one of the things that I picked up on when you did the 10 minutes, 10 questions with Erin, Freddie, was this idea of functional music. And, we're very intrigued by it because Nigel and I also spoke about it quite extensively before we came on here with you. And we thought it would be interesting for our audience, also some of whom may not know what or heard of functional music. What is it? Let's start off with what is it? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's a nice place to start. So we've actually, I'll start just by saying, with my other hat on as part of the Global Wellness Institute, I chair something called the Music for Health and Wellbeing Initiative. And one of the things that we're just about to launch is the kind of a grounding framework, a lexicon of all these different terms that relate to music. So a lot of people in this industry and other industries, they'll have certain terms that they're familiar with, some that they've heard that they possibly think might overlap. So one I always hear is, what's the difference between sound therapy and music therapy, or functional music or therapeutic music, right? And there's a general use of language and the definition of said language that I think could be more clearly and easily accessed. So that's coming relatively soon. So you'll be able to see all the various different definitions laid out against each other. But functional music at its core is very simply music that has the intention of an outcome considered during its creation. So the actual music has a utility to it. It's functional at its core, as opposed to, in the film and television side of the work that we do, it's all about art and entertainment. Music is there as, almost like your introspection coming out to the world. You're creating things that you intuit. Whereas in this particular case, whilst artistry is critically important in any form of production of content or music, it's not the primary. In this particular regard, you're considering music as a tool to achieve an outcome, and that's what makes it functional.
Freddie, I have a quick question for you just on that. Are you finding, as we do, as a developer, right, I find, I think it's pretty clear in the industry. First, everybody jumped on wellness. Now everybody's jumping on longevity, whether they're longevity or not, whether they're wellness or not. Are you finding the same noise around functional music?
Yes. People like to use terms and market, and there are very few barriers to do so, which I think is dangerous. As a very simple example, how many are you both familiar with binaural beats as a general kind of concept? It went completely like wildfire through this industry and many others, and certainly there are some fantastic properties to binaural. But I would hazard that I could ask many people in this industry who are considering binaural as being something that's necessary, who wouldn't be able to define it, wouldn't be able to describe what the actual benefits are specifically. And when you start reading into literature, you actually start getting a bit of a muddied description of what can actually be achieved using binaural. It's absolutely not clearly defined that the utility is there from the aspect of delivering music in a binaural format, um, which I find really interesting because it was the primary tool to
Yeah.
say I have an evidence-based music program was because I'm delivering it via binaural. I don't know who decided that was the case that it needed to be. I'm not sure where they read all their literature. There are certainly studies which showcase there is benefit to it, but there are also studies that showcase there isn't. So my view personally is evidence-based matters in an industry where you're dealing with health outcomes. It's critical.
Absolutely.
We get the benefit of dealing with experience as well as also outcome. So if you're not certain that you can achieve outcome objectively, have very clear, well-researched scientific measures that showcase the ability to improve outcome with evidence-based, just by nature, don't market that. Market on experience. If that's what you can do, tell people you can do that. So our view has always been like, music has a long way to go to be fully understood. There are the literature is really clear. Objectively, music helps. It has the ability to help support with a variety of different outcomes. There's still a lot to be understood about what parts of music help the best for what particular outcomes. So my approach has always been pretty simple. Start by saying, hey, this is a service which is going to be great because it provides you with more options. You're going to be able to listen to it and apply it with more intention. That's going to do all the things you already do really well. Market the experience factor, and then say, oh, and by the way, we've just completed this research study, with X or Y institution, and now it's also super credible, which is great, and that maybe one day can help you tell a different story about being more clinical in your approach. But that's always been my case. It's just try and walk before you run. A lot of people tend to try and get the sale in instantly, but I think that can be damaging to the industry.
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right with that, Freddie. So if you talk about the evidence, whether it's obviously a particular study that you may be involved with or will be involved with, in terms of what's out there in the literature, can you enlighten us to what's out there in terms of functional music in the literature about the benefits? Just high level. What are some of the things that people should know?
Yeah, there's some, again, actually, this is one of the things that will be in the kind of white paper for the Institute. So what I would suggest is, and unfortunately, I wish I was already at a point where I could just say, here's the link and have a read, but it will be coming soon. So perhaps it's something I can follow up with once we've actually managed to figure out how to publish to a microsite, which is always the biggest barrier to technology. But on a high level basis, there's a lot of foundational literature looking at some of the kind of core outcomes. So for instance, stuff we've been involved with looking at sleep on a mass population basis. We know that certain types of music, like slow, melodic, sometimes even percussive and rhythmic music, has impact on improving, one, sleep outcomes, but two, different types of sleep, so they can induce certain phases of sleep. So we ran a study, for instance, with Sleep School Labs, which is a fantastic gold standard laboratory out of San Diego. And it had some really interesting findings that showcase that actually different types of music elicit different parts of sleep at different points. And so the answer, which I'm finding in pretty much every research thing we do, is there are more questions. So now we're continuing to ask more questions. But some of the more sort of widely published literature, they show things like music is incredibly valuable in dementia care for those who have ASD. There's been some interesting studies on epilepsy and a variety of different other use cases. So more kind of high impact need groups where music is being utilized as part of care. There's a great company that I'm fond of because I really like how they sort of spun out of a research lab and use music as a tool to help people. It's called MedRhythms. I'm not involved with them, but I like them a lot. I don't know them at all. I haven't met them, but I've always admired them. And they use music to help people learn how to walk again after they've had a stroke. And they've done that out of a body of research from NYU, which is really nice. So there's pockets of literature. I think the thing which we've been really looking for is, sort of a unifying framework of, okay, great, yeah, objectively we can identify that baseline. Music helps, cool. Question is, if we can identify and isolate the outcome you're trying to achieve, let's even just use sleep, right? I want to help someone fall asleep at night. Now you have all the variables that sit around that. Okay, so who are they? Where did they grow up? What do they listen to? What are their particular need states? Do they have sleep apnea? Do they have other conditions that might be prohibitive to finding sleep? All of those aspects then craft the story to say, as the composer sitting at the sort of in the studio saying, okay, well, what am I going to write here? We want to create that framework that allows you to have best practices. You can optimize it for the function you're trying to achieve. So, like, for instance, just going on the simplicity of that first study with the Sleep Score Labs, we found that using rhythm was more akin to them being able to help people fall asleep quicker, as opposed to not using rhythm, which helped them stay asleep deeper, right? Just very simple, fall faster or sleep deeper. So fundamentally, you now have like, okay, well, am I trying to get someone to listen to music before they go to bed? Or am I trying to get someone to listen to music while they sleep or when they wake up? How am I trying to influence their behavior, influence the outcome? And as a creator, how do we then empower someone with the knowledge of how are you thinking about rhythm, right? As a starting point. And then they can tell us, go away, I'm an artist, or they could say, I'm going to adopt that. And that's their decision because they're the creator. And that's super important. We want them to have that kind of artistic decision making. But our view is you want to try and empower every composer in the world to have as much information as they possibly can. And so our principle as a business, which is why I tend to do a lot of this stuff as part of the Global Wellness Institute, is that there should never be a moat around knowledge. Like just because I run a session or run a study doesn't mean I should then, my composers who happen to know me, get access to the best quality. If we are able to, let's say, find music that helps, unequivocally, objectively improve treatment outcomes, the barrier to having access to that information shouldn't be knowing me. That would be ridiculous. Every composer should have access to that music. Our superpower as Myndstream, hopefully, is we should get that into your spaces seamlessly and intentionally for exactly what you want it for. It's all in the distribution. So that's kind of how I know I've taken your question and made it into a rambling monologue, which I apologize. But I got excited because I like speaking about the foundations of literature.
Well, actually, that was really enlightening, the whole, let's say, wide spectrum. Nigel, I saw that you were inching to have a comment or a brief question before we go to the next big topic. What was that about?
I would. I mean, and it actually kind of bounces off what you just said, Freddie, because I've used Myndstream in Mynos Palace, my project in Greece.
Sure.
And the reason that we used Myndstream was because, as this industry evolves, right, and as a developer of wellness, you want to engage in multi-dimensional storytelling. And so Myndstream, and a couple of others, but Myndstream is a breakaway from, the 5 different styles of music spa model, where normally one is a piano and it crescendos halfway through a massage. But the reason why we did it for Mynos Palace was because we wanted to explore, again, how people could have interaction and immersive engagement with the environment itself, and what that looks like in terms of an added dimension to the story of elevated flow state, and how music can impact parasympathetic, sympathetic systems. And so what you guys are doing, from my perspective at least, and not just at least, but from my perspective, what you guys are doing is able, because at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller, and I'm able to tell a much bigger story of how to reach optimized, elevated flow states with access to these kind of interventions.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And the thing which I get excited about is music it's a soundtrack. It plays well best with others. And so the more thinking you've done around what story you're trying to tell, the better the tool the music can be. It's around trying to soundtrack an experience, bring a product to life with an audio dimension. It's, trying to reach a guest before they come into the walls. It's trying to give them a gift that they can take away afterwards. It's using music as that tool to tell the stories that already matter, that you've already invested in. And so that's where we always try and prioritize our focus. How can we help be that soundtrack to it?
Yeah.
How to be the soundtrack. I love that. How to be the soundtrack for that storytelling. Yeah. So before we go to the next big topic, because we really want to, dive deep into this, also, we wanted clarification, Nigel and I. You talked about flow state, and we all know this whole conversation around hertz and how you play music at certain hertz. I'm wondering if you can briefly just give us an idea. Would the idea of playing something in 432 hertz or 532 or what have you be part of the functional music definition? Is that part of it, or is that a separate matter that we would have to have another webinar on?
It's a separate matter. It's an aspect of. So if you want to think of it as a hierarchy of functional music is kind of the governing body of music created for outcome, frequency-based things, or in this case, as you referenced, the solfeggio frequencies of 432 as an example is a very classic one. That's binaural, different aspects of composition. So, the way you sort of manipulate dynamics or timbre or any aspect of, making up music, those are all tools as the toolkit to create the overall functional music soundtrack. So, in a brief nutshell, what I think is really nice about the frequency-based stuff, I think there's more research required to really understand objectively what the outcomes. And we're actually just in the process of defining a new paper that we're investigating here. So the literature is still a little bit muddy, clearly, for clarity's sake. But one thing that is definitive is there are alignments between what frequency you choose and other aspects of treatment rituals, like chakras, for instance. There are frequencies that align specifically to particular energy points. And so therefore, if you already have a ritual-based approach and you care about, let's call it your whole part as far as painted yellow, because that's the particular energy you're trying to achieve. You've considered chromotherapy. You have a story that has this kind of more spiritual feeling. It doesn't matter that I can't equivocally prove or objectively prove that the chakra aligned frequency is going to deliver this incremental improvement in your relaxation outcomes. That's, to me, irrelevant. It would be great if I had it, but that's not the predefining factor. If I can tell the story to the guest that we have considered every aspect of the ambiance in order to transport you from A to B, that journey, and priming someone to understand that they're about to be on something that's been really intentionally designed for them, is enough to get them to experience something that could be a flow state. So I always like to think of it in those things. I still love the idea of, if we can objectively discover that would be amazing. And certainly we should tell everyone in the whole world if that's the case. But even still, you can take a step back before, and you have to think about the sort of rudimentary science, or, going through a horrifying peer-reviewed, randomized control study, because those are lengthy and expensive and they take a lot of time, and they're not always necessary, not in our space. If we're starting to apply music into chemo wards, then maybe we have to be a bit more discerning about specific treatment outcomes and how we objectively measure them before we start prescribing them. But if you're defining experience and you're trying to transport someone from A to B, the fact you can transport them by designing it intentionally, that's, in my view, worth considering, particularly if you've already gone half the way there by thinking about all the other senses. It just makes sense to me that you shouldn't just have a crescendo piano playing in the background in its place.
Absolutely. So, and that means that, Nigel, we're going to have to get Freddie back on to have a whole conversation on that one. And we want to get into the whole placebo thing, but that's a whole other matter. Sure. But, Nigel and I were talking about something that we both were curious about. And, you've mentioned the word outcome-based several times during this conversation. And you also mentioned in the conversation with Erin, this idea of an ROI, this kind of sort of evergreen. So you have a client that comes in and it says, make me my own music. And we've always heard you say, if you do this, actually, you are going to have a kind of a residual. It's an evergreen element. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What that really means? If you talk to Nigel and say, Nigel, this is what your client can expect, what would you say to Nigel that they should expect?
Yeah, music at its core is an asset. So therefore, commercialize it as such. I guess this is because I come out of the film and television world. That's where our family cut our teeth, and kind of what I always go back to when it comes to music rights management. It boggles my mind particularly when I entered this industry, that people were just kind of looking at music as this sonic wallpaper that was in the background, didn't come into part of the treatment, and then more importantly was just a cost center. It was just a P&L expense. You paid your grand, $2,000, you paid your PRO license, and then you were like done, and then you'd either buy a CD because you were fed up of cutouts or whatever it was, and that was it. And that is not how music works in any aspect of production. What happens is music, you get an audio partner who defines the sonic experience of said production. They consider all aspects of the production being brought from the actual creation phase to the cinemas and then beyond. You release, you bring on composer on, you invest in the audio as an asset, and then it returns for you. And to come to your question of how does it return to you, it earns from royalty income. You have all these commercial structures that have already been built and put in place in order to ensure that artists and those who own music rights and earn from music rights, because there are two different kind of bodies in that part, they are able to actually earn when people listen to music. And that is something that spas should benefit from, in my view. So if you are, let's say, so what we tend to do is we say, okay, well, great, now we're in your space. We put our standard treatment-led or outcome-led music that you can start selecting from. Now let's think about those things that are uniquely yours. How does your spa sound different to anyone else's spa? Why are people going to come back to your particular location? What treatments have you already invested in? What products have you got? What technologies have you just bought so that we can make sound great? How can we connect everything together? All those kind of concepts are the first thing we start with. And we can do that with existing music, and that's fine. And certainly that is quite cost effective. It's fairly efficient, and you can still get lots of choice, and everything's going to be good. If you have extra budget, we say, let's create something together, because then it's going to be really uniquely to yours. And you then have the ability to do things like sonic branding. So we can start defining what the sound of your location is, what the sound of your brand is. If you have a portfolio of locations, how do you create consistency across all of them, but yet maintain regional relevance to each individual one? So like going like the I'm loving it kind of concept from McDonald's. I won't hum the tune because none of the people watching need to hear that. But
we're in wellness, Freddie.
We're in wellness. We don't need McDonald's slogans popping into each other's ears. I apologize if anyone is desperate for a Big Mac now. I brought it up. But that concept of having something that you uniquely identifiable with just 5 notes, you can know it's that brand. That hasn't existed across hospitality, and there's such an opportunity for it because you have these experience-led locations that belong to portfolios where each one is trying to define their own unique identifying experience. And I promise I am coming to your actual question, which was essentially, so if you drive value into the assets you're creating, either through brand or through treatment, you consider things like, okay, how do we get someone in the right mindset to have a treatment? How do you extend the treatment after they leave? So these are these concepts that you speak beautifully about around Touchless, all these different moments in the guest journey. Music has its part to play in those, or it can have a bigger part to play in those potentially. And so when they go beyond their walls, you can give them music and say, hey, I hope you enjoyed your stay at so-and-so location. Either come visit the next one, or here's a little gift as a reminder. You can deliver it. We have the ability to deliver it through YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, all the big players, because we're direct partners with them. We have a 6.5 million subscriber base on our YouTube channel, as an example, right? Very easy to get access out there. One, that's unbelievable brand impressions. That's the second largest wellness music channel in the consumer space. So these are all wellness enthusiasts who are looking for their next wellness experience. What a great way to put your brand in front of someone relatively subtly, potentially to try and convert. Usually you pay for impressions. This one you earn out of. And most importantly, every time they listen to it, it pays royalties. So that's where you start getting these evergreen passive income streams. It's because you start treating music for what it is, which is an asset, which can be commercialized. And so, we've started getting good at a lot of stuff, but what we've always been pretty good at is we're very strong music rights managers. That's our DNA. We've been doing it for 20 years in the film and television business, and that's why we've ended up becoming the leading provider of music for film and TV. We're just borrowing all that infrastructure and shipping it into hospitality. So it's been fun seeing people start learning about, actually, you don't have to think of it as sonic wallpaper. You can do some pretty cool stuff with music.
I like the sonic wallpaper reference because it's true. It's 100% true. I mean, traditional spa models with the 5 channels, the sonic wallpaper. Yeah,
precisely it. And I think the other thing to mention on that the kind of channel infrastructure, I completely get why that has been the model. It makes perfect sense for where music has been and where providers have been. But there isn't a value alignment based on that model. And this is the big thing that we found a little bit frustrating, if I can use this word, as we entered the industry, because when you think about who benefits from the current setup of the system, it's not the guest and it's definitely not the therapist, because you end up with these channel infrastructures where the revenue contract between location and supplier of audio, it's usually zonal and it's size dependent. So if you have a larger location, I can charge you as a partner more for the more zones or more channels within those zones. The problem with that model is as soon as that contract level's locked, I don't have a way of growing it unless you're planning on opening another 6 treatment rooms, which doesn't happen often. So the only way I can make my contract profitable is managing my costs, which is, can I restrict the amount of catalog I pay out to? So less options in the content that I deliver, less frequent updates and rotations. So the people who lose out are the therapists who listen to the same stuff on repeat, horrifying, and the guest who has a much less intentional journey because they don't have a professional audio partner who's every day is about saying, how do we soundtrack this the best way we possibly can, right? So the way we wanted to disrupt that immediately was like, get out of this size-based concept. Let's value align around doing what makes sense for the guest and the listener, which is, let's create an asset that works for the brand. And therefore I can, if I do my job well, every one of my clients or partners or locations should be coming to me and saying, I want to create more music with you because you just earned me money out of the first batch of music that I created. So if I do my job well and continue proving the value that music can have, I have an opportunity to scale every relationship I have, because everyone comes back and says, I didn't realize music could earn. Now it does. How do I invest more? It's not about spending less. It's about investing more. And it's a really challenging perception shift, because when you start thinking that way, it's, you're putting cash down, and that's risk, that's challenge, it's tough, but it's a completely different method of spending, because you're not, and this is why we always talk about, trying to split out operating expenditure, making that as simple and easy and simple to deliver as possible. And that's kind of how we start our relationships. And then anything else, we try and make sure that we figure out, okay, if you're a portfolio, how can this be CapEx at a group level? We amortize it across all the locations. And then you start thinking about how you can actually drive value and make it easy and relatively simple to join. And thankfully, that's kind of the accountancy background coming in play here. So
very enlightening. So Nigel, how would you apply it very quickly in the last 2 minutes that we have left?
No, I was just going to say, even with the work I did with the Oberoi group in India, right? I mean, you can't blanket all of India's colors and cultures in one concept. And so you create a framework that manifests itself. The identifiers are still there, but it manifests itself slightly differently with each location to kind of honor purpose and place. And I hadn't really considered the music being a part of that, but actually what you said before, when we were less into the business and more into the romance,
sure,
is actually really true what you said. I mean, if to take it across the brand, but still have it be the identifiable soundtrack, but have the nuances to give it purpose and place. Concepts that I do that. So you want to really see the identifiers of the same concept, but the exciting way is, I hate to use the word circuit, but you almost kind of create a little bit of a circuit with the Oberoi. I want to go to this next Oberoi and see how this manifests there. And I hadn't really applied that to the music. My other real quick question then, every time I speak to you, I always end up with more questions. But in the industry, this industry has massively evolved in 25 years, but it's somehow the evolutions have crept up on us. Technology is not one of those evolutions. Technology is very pellucidly, evidently in our face. And I think music also is one of those things. But I was just listening to you talking about all of the research you're doing, that you sometimes get overwhelmed about the possibilities because Alina heard me say this before, like I like being in this position where the good news and the bad news are the same thing. The good news is it never happened before. The bad news is it's never happened before. But I think that's probably where you are as well, in terms of how music interacts, or how we interact with music?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've not been asked it before. I tend, I guess, not to think about it too deeply, or get too philosophical around the true impact we're trying to make, I guess. There are clear challenges that we have to overcome. You mentioned the speed and rate of change of innovation and technology specifically. It's so exciting what you can deliver through technology nowadays that can personalize an experience and can deliver so much value. Yet the hardware that exists as infrastructure embedded across most of these locations has not been updated in 15 to 20 years. And so you have a clear and difficult challenge of, you may come up with the most exciting method of integrating and delivering, improved experience, driving touchless wellness in a few different aspects of a location, but then you're presented with, a speaker system that just sounds like a tin can, and no way of actually delivering it, because it's offline and it needs a CD. So, unfortunately, there are always going to be barriers and challenges. And I think when you want to do something disruptive, the way we've always thought about it is, let the technology aid you in what you want to try and drive, and make sure you have the ability to bring it as far back and distill it to the simplest possible solution possible, so that everyone can benefit in some way. Some should have the full benefit and really be able to, and these new developments, some of the flagships that we are privileged to work with, they're doing some fascinating stuff with how they're considering their music strategy now, which I don't think anyone would have considered possible a couple of years ago, which we're really excited to be part of. But there are also these amazing ways that day spas are thinking about music, and they're not investing in it. They're just using the off-the-shelf service. They're just considering it and making it part of how they deliver their service. And I think this is one of the things I really resonated with Touchless Wellness. It was like, okay, there's all these incredible pieces of tech, this hardware you can invest in, the way you can think about it, all the way down to just think about, how can you bring a bit of touchless in and extend all these different outcomes, and just make it accessible to people, because there's a spectrum of those of the impact you can make. And I think if you think with that broad sensibility, you can have much more impact. So I err on the side of opportunity in the way you frame your question, but I love it. And actually, I'll say one more thing, and apologies, Alina, because I know I'm rambling on, but I like that you brought up the romance side of things. I'd like to sort of mention one of the things that I love about the simplicity of music, and the romance of artistry, and kind of the resonance you get from listening to particularly human creative music, something which comes from a place. And this comes to the point around storytelling. I think there's such a clear opportunity, even just playing music and understanding the story behind why it was created, and being able to help prime and let someone understand what they're about to experience, and set those therapists up to be the expert in that room, and guide someone through something, not even necessarily like a meditation or breath work. I'm saying simply composition in maybe you're lying on a lovely piece of vibroacoustic technology, and you just want to have a moment to yourself as an autonomous treatment sort of add-on, right? But if that music is created by someone with a story for a reason, with intention, there's this romanticism that comes through, which I think can actually be really special. And that's not costly to apply at all. That part can be free.
And that's an important emotional piece to everything that we do. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Freddie, when you made the reference to touchless wellness, because in essence, everything that you've been talking about is in fact a touchless wellness, every part of it. So as we wrap up here, certainly I want to thank you for being with us today. And I'm going to be hitting you up, Freddie, because I'm going to be taking something to a group of 5-star hotels on the Indian Ocean. And both the conversation that you and Nigel had on this piece really also sparked a lot of ideas in me, particularly when you have a property that says, I want to integrate wellness, touchless wellness seamlessly. And what you're doing is really a no-brainer, particularly when you talk about the romanticism, the emotional component, the sensorial component, and most importantly, the outcome-based aspect of it. So from my end, I want to say thank you very much for being with us, and look forward to many more conversations.
If I can make one last comment, just because, and I apologize for extending this to everyone who's watching, but you
You're
touched
going to
on
have to make these longer. I already got that, Freddie. So you've been the prototype. We're excited about that, okay?
I really like the way you mention integration and consistency, and I think this is one thing. I mean, like, you just have to think for a second. How many examples can you consider where maybe a sauna isn't sort of picked up to the actual speaker system, it isn't driving the same sort of content. There are these kind of add-ons of touchless wellness that people may invest in. Maybe they buy a kind of a salt chamber, or maybe they buy a vibroacoustic bed, but they're not driven by the same direct system. And so I think the application of sonic strategy, the idea of what should your sound be across the journey of a guest, it needs to be considered with all areas in mind, not just within the location, but the different points of technology, and then integrated to be delivered. That's the kind of the crux. So the thing which I've been really excited about, and one of the things that I'm probably most proud of, particularly of the team who spent a long time in this space, it was really this question of how can we seamlessly integrate across all these different kind of small pieces that can add on and part of the upsell, get out of the spa and into the guest room. Huge opportunity to start thinking about how you prime a guest or help them reset and relax afterwards. These are massive moments where you can start thinking about strategy for strategy's sake, not just within your walls, but beyond those walls. And I think that's a really important piece. So, again, huge admirer of what you do at Touchless Wellness. I think it's so important. It's such a clear and obvious thing that people need to do. It's just a question of how do you do it right, which is why I'm grateful that you've founded such an incredible association that spends the time doing the work to actually help guide people to make good decisions around how do they bring it into the space. It's important, it's timely, and it's much appreciated, I'm sure, by all the industry, and certainly I can speak, hopefully, on behalf of them to say thank you for that.
You do. You've got that, Freddie. Nigel, any last thoughts before we sign off?
Absolutely. No, I'm good.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much both for your time.
No, thank you really
very much.
Yeah. I liked how Freddie ended it. I thought that was a good ending. I didn't want to mess that ending.
It was a good ending. And Freddie, seriously, you've been the prototype.
There we go. And hopefully I didn't break the mold here too much. Maybe next time find a less rambly guest.
Always a joy.
Quite the opposite. It was really important to have. I enjoyed having this conversation. I think we all did, and we have some really nice comments here that I'll just briefly say. Liam Patton says, great to listen to a talk all about music and audio. Many thanks to Alina, Nigel, and Freddie for this. Perry Berry says, loving this conversation, so insightful and timely. The information being shared is incredibly relevant, especially in this exciting era of wellness innovation. Well, some issues with the good news is you can also get excellent explanation on functional sound music therapy.
I think, Alina, you think you're having some Wi-Fi issues.
Just started cutting out at the end.
So I think we achieved what we do. Thank you again, Freddie.
Excellent.
Thanks,
until next time.
See you at Sparlight, huh?
See you. I won't be there this year, sadly. I've got a new baby coming, so I'm
That's right.
under orders.
All right. Oh yeah. Stay under orders.
Exactly. The importance of the boss says no, sadly, but I hope everyone enjoys it. It's always a great event. I'll be sad to miss you on the dance floor.
Best of luck next week.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye.